The moment I stepped into that courtroom, Diane barked out a laugh so loud it echoed off the paneled walls like a sitcom laugh track gone stale. Not the nervous kind either, the smug, rehearsed one she'd probably practiced in her bathroom mirror. She nudged Craig with her elbow like we were all at some backyard barbecue. Not a custody hearing that would determine whether or not I got to see my daughter more than twice a month. Craig, slicked back hair and a blazer 2 sizes too tight, leaned in with a smirk so greasy I could feel my cholesterol rise. "He's nothing," he whispered, "just loud enough. Loud enough for Diane to laugh harder. Loud enough for their little entourage of moral superiority to catch the joke." I didn't say a word, just kept walking step by step, like a ghost through fog. But then something odd happened, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking closely. The judge looked up and paused. Her hand, mid-reach for the pitcher of water, froze. Eyes locked on me, a flicker of recognition. Her jaw tensed and that gavel, yeah, it trembled just a bit before she placed it gently back down. Not slammed, placed, like it might explode if she mishandled it. I saw her glance at the sealed envelope on her bench. Her fingers brushed it. Then she adjusted her robe like she was suddenly too warm. The room went quiet. Not courtroom quiet, graveyard quiet. Craig furrowed his brow and leaned back like he smelled something off. Diane stopped mid-smirk. I could see her scanning the judge's face like she was trying to solve a riddle written in a language she didn't speak. You ever see a predator look at something it thought was prey, only to realize it had been staring at another predator all along? That moment of confused calculation? That was Diane's face. "Look, I know how this usually goes." The soft-spoken, middle-aged guy walks in after a year of divorce hell, gets trampled by lawyers with teeth and exes with rehearsed trauma. But not today. Not this time. By the way, if you're still listening and haven't tapped out yet, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. More than 97% of listeners don't, and honestly, keeps our team going strong and digging deeper into stories like these. Anyway, I didn't even take the seat next to my lawyer right away. I stood for a second, long enough for Diane to look down at her phone like that might reset the moment. Craig leaned forward again, whispering something this time that didn't earn a laugh. His mouth moved, but her eyes were fixed on the judge now, who was pulling a file out from beneath her bench, sealed in red tape. Not yellow, not white, red. I saw it from across the room. Craig squinted. "What the hell is that?" I caught his lips mouthing. "Good question, Craig. You'll find out." The bailiff asked us to rise. The judge looked directly at me. Her tone was neutral, but it had an edge. "Mr. Fields," she said, "you may be seated." That was the moment Diane blinked. She hadn't expected anyone to speak my name with anything but contempt. Definitely not with recognition. I sat slowly, folding my hands in my lap. Diane leaned toward her attorney, whispering now with urgency. The smirk was gone. Craig glanced at the judge, then back at me. I gave him a polite nod. You ever see a man try to laugh off a nervous fart in church? That's how he looked. Funny how silence does more damage than shouting. Funny how the absence of fear is what shakes people the most. Not rage, not tears, just calm. You want to know the best part? They thought they had this all mapped out. Craig probably memorized his concerned stepfather routine in front of a mirror. Diane had printed photos, probably the worst ones of me she could find. Hell, maybe she'd even written a statement about how I used to be someone. Yeah. Used to be. What they didn't know, what nobody in that courtroom knew, was that the man sitting quietly behind the table with a pen and a single yellow legal pad wasn't here to survive the hearing. He was here to end it. When the papers hit my desk, delivered, of course, not handed, I remember just staring at the return address like it might rearrange itself into something less humiliating. Diane Fields versus Thomas Fields, printed cleanly in that mechanical font courts seemed to love, as if the slow death of a 20-year marriage could be summarized by one serifed V. In the middle. It wasn't even a surprise. We'd been coexisting like two ghosts in the same house for over a year by then. Still, the delivery made it official. Diane hadn't said a word about it that morning. She just left me a list of grocery items and went to her yoga class like I didn't exist. I moved out 2 weeks later. Small rental outside of town. The kind of place where the faucet doesn't shut off all the way and the front porch light flickers like a dying firefly. It smelled like someone else's regrets. I didn't decorate. Didn't hang anything on the walls. What would have been the dining room table was just a folding card table with a laptop, 2 folders, and a wireless mouse that refused to stay connected. She told the kids I was adjusting, that I needed space to figure things out. They didn't understand why their mom's new boyfriend already knew their bedtime snack preferences. They asked me more than once why Craig was picking them up from school in my truck. Diane had transferred the title before the ink was dry on the divorce. Said it was easier that way. I didn't argue. Craig. God, Craig. He strutted into our lives like a mall brand Tony Robbins. Loud, assertive, always smiling like a politician who thinks he just won a debate. He was already talking about next steps with the kids, planning vacations, slipping his opinion into their parent-teacher conferences. Diane let him. No, encouraged him. She said things like, "He's just more forward-thinking than you." Or, "Maybe if you'd updated your resume sometime in the last decade, we wouldn't be here." I didn't respond. Not to that. Not to any of it. I didn't need to, because what Diane didn't realize, what neither of them did, was that every insult, every manipulation, every time they thought I was zoning out, I was watching and recording, not on some tacky spy app or voice memo. I took notes, meticulous notes, dates, statements, money movements, weird charges on our old joint card before she closed the account. One time, I noticed a $9,700 consulting payment to an LLC with a name that sounded like a retirement firm. I Googled it. Turns out it was registered 3 weeks prior to Craig's career change. They never noticed I kept the Wi-Fi printer when I moved out. Every single message she sent me through that parenting app. Printed. Highlighted. Annotated. When she said, "You're not even trying," I underlined it and wrote, "Declined 3 weekend visits." I printed the school calendar. I printed emails from teachers asking if I was aware of missed assignments during her custody weeks. I printed it all. I was called obsessive, detached, nostalgic for a life that no longer exists. She mocked the way I still wore my watch on the inside of my wrist like I did back in the army. Said it made me look old-fashioned. Good. They thought I was going through some pathetic male spiral. Classic story. Wife leaves, man sulks in a dusty apartment, and some newer model steps in with charm and credit lines. But I wasn't sulking. I was documenting. You see, when your enemy doesn't see you as a threat, they get sloppy. They repeat themselves. They stop hiding things. Craig started treating me like a defeated ex, not like a man he'd soon be cross-examined next to. Diane spoke freely, sometimes loudly, especially when she thought the kids were asleep. I positioned the baby monitor in my daughter's room toward the hall. You'd be amazed how much range those things have when the microphone is cracked just enough. One night, she told Craig, "I'll just say he's unstable. It's easy. He's so quiet. People already believe it." And I wrote that down, word for word. The turning point wasn't dramatic. No epiphany or pep talk. Just me, alone, staring at 2 manila folders thicker than a law textbook and realizing I wasn't trying to get her back. I wasn't trying to prove anything to Craig. I was building a case, not in court. In reality, they wanted to drag me into a play. I was rewriting the script. It was raining the night I knocked on Margot Rayner's door. Not pouring. Just that slow, persistent kind of drizzle that finds its way into your collar no matter how tight you fasten your coat. Her house was quiet, tucked behind an iron gate on a cul-de-sac so forgotten even Google Maps gave up halfway through. The same kind of place someone like her would retire to. Private, unbothered, and armed with at least 3 layers of security. She opened the door herself. Still tall, still sharp-eyed, still dressed like the world might need a deposition at any moment. "You brought whiskey or paperwork?" she asked. I held up a bottle of Glenlivet. She stepped aside. 10 years earlier, I'd helped her during a mess involving the misappropriation of charity funds. I wasn't anyone important. Just the guy who fixed a data leak that exposed some of the fraud before the board caught wind. But I didn't ask questions. I just handed her the logs. She remembered that. Said I was the only man in that room who kept his mouth shut and his integrity intact. We sat at her kitchen table. No small talk. I slid one of the thick folders across. She didn't ask if it was legal. She asked, "Do you want to destroy them?" "No," I said. "I want to expose them. Cleanly." She smiled just barely. "Good. Revenge is for the desperate. Truth? That's for builders." That was the beginning. Margot didn't operate like the lawyers Diane hired. She didn't rehearse courtroom monologues or obsess over optics. She listened, sketched timelines in pencil, cross-referenced everything I'd gathered. Her desk turned into a crime scene map, color-coded lines, arrows, sticky notes. She didn't just look for leverage. She looked for truth, the kind that survives scrutiny. She asked one question early on that stuck with me. What are you willing to let go of to win this the right way? And I knew the answer before she finished asking. Over the next 2 months, I sold the condo we'd once bought as a fixer-upper retirement plan. Didn't flinch. Transferred 40% of my shares in a business I co-founded to my partner, along with voting rights. Signed over the vacation timeshare we'd never used. Diane thought it was an investment. I knew it was a sunk cost with oceanfront views. I wasn't just shedding assets. I was reducing my surface area, making myself legally lean, untouchable. Every loose end, Margot warned, is a future liability. She will drag anything into this courtroom if it looks even remotely vulnerable. So I left nothing vulnerable. Nothing for her to claw at. Meanwhile, Margot drafted a motion, too, actually. One standard. One under seal. She'd reviewed the local judge roster and identified a name she recognized. Honorable Elise Templeton. They'd crossed paths during a federal compliance review years ago. Margot said she was sharp, fair, and allergic to dramatics. Perfect. We filed the sealed motion under a subsection rarely used in family court, linked to financial fraud discovery. Most attorneys wouldn't bother. Margot did. Inside that motion was a request for limited sealed review of transactional discrepancies involving 2 parties. Diane Fields and one Craig Halperin. It wasn't an accusation. It was a breadcrumb trail. A legal whisper that something was worth looking at. Quietly, thoroughly. We didn't tell Diane. We didn't notify her lawyer. Under sealed provisions, we didn't have to. That was the beauty of it. By the time the court date rolled around, Judge Templeton would already have the file. Already have the evidence. And most importantly, already have questions. In the background, I kept showing up for my daughter. Every Tuesday and alternate weekend. I bought her the same peanut butter crackers we used to share in the park. Listened when she talked about how Craig says I should call him Dad too. I never flinched. I just logged it all. Kept calm. Never badmouthed Diane. Just kept being steady. Let them make noise. We made paper. Margot said something one night over a stack of receipts. The difference between them and us? They want to win. We want the truth to be undeniable. That's the kind of thing you don't need to argue. Just point. So we built the record. Quietly. Strategically. Every receipt, transaction, video file, audio snippet, cataloged and timestamped. Margot had contacts who verified bank transfers and traced LLC ownerships. She even found a prior complaint against Craig in another state. Settled quietly. But there. Enough to hint at a pattern. When the last folder was sealed, Margot closed it gently and leaned back. We've loaded the cannon, she said. Now we wait for them to light the match. They strutted into that courtroom like it was a movie set and they were the stars. Diane had on a blazer that screamed respectable mother. Even though I knew she'd never worn it anywhere but court. Hair pulled tight, lips painted a shade too dark. Like she wanted to project authority but ended up just looking like a woman who hired someone to teach her posture. Craig walked beside her in a navy suit that still had the store creases down the pants. He adjusted his cufflinks 4 times before the judge even walked in. Probably Googled courtroom power moves. That morning while Diane reheated her lies. Their lawyer, a younger guy named Powell, had the swagger of someone who'd only ever argued against paper men. You know the type. Bullet points on note cards, emotional tone preset to righteous outrage, and a binder thick enough to land a helicopter on. The moment he saw me sitting quietly next to Margot, no entourage, no stack of exhibits, just a small legal pad and 2 documents. We saw it on his face. Pity. He thought this would be easy. Diane had her folder of photographs. Not candid shots of our daughter laughing. No, these were carefully chosen images where I looked tired, unshaven, distracted. One from the month I worked double shifts during layoffs. Another from a birthday I missed because Diane changed the pickup schedule without telling me. Presented without context. Each one designed to make me look like a fading ghost in my child's life. Then came the videos. Edited, of course. Little slices of tantrums and bedtime chaos. All stitched together like a greatest hits reel of parental failure. Craig's voice could be heard off-screen sometimes. Calm. Condescending. Narrating moments like a documentary host. This is what we deal with when she comes back from Thomas's weekends. That line got a chuckle from Diane's row. Her sister was there. Her friend Jenna, too. Arms crossed. Nodding like cult members at a sermon. They believed it. All of it. Why wouldn't they? The materials were rehearsed, polished, weaponized. They didn't know they were walking into a minefield someone else had already mapped. Because what they didn't see, what no one on their side saw, was that the judge had already opened the sealed file that morning. Margot confirmed it when we walked in. Templeton had acknowledged the motion, initialed the pages, and spent 45 minutes reviewing exhibits privately before the session began. She knew about the wire transfers. She knew about the LLC link to Craig. She had the audio transcript flagged from the nanny. She'd already seen the story beneath the performance. And Craig? His name wasn't new to her anymore. She had it highlighted. Repeatedly. The performance went on anyway. Diane cried on cue when the photos were displayed. Craig offered testimony about the emotional environment my daughter experienced. Their lawyer used phrases like parental instability, codependent routines, and resistance to modern co-parenting norms. It was a production, complete with emphasis and carefully spaced pauses to let their performance breathe. But something started shifting by minute 35. Judge Templeton leaned back in her chair, eyes flat, lips pressed. When Powell tried to pivot from photos to their proposed custody revision, she interrupted for the first time. Not rudely, just a quiet question. Mr. Halperin, can you clarify your involvement in this LLC listed here? Craig blinked. I'm sorry? Templeton tapped her pen on a folder. This one, she said, registered 4 months ago. It's listed under a parent company connected to 2 wire transfers from Mrs. Field's personal account. You're noted as the managing officer. Powell froze mid-step. Craig glanced at Diane. Diane's eyes narrowed, just for a second. Then Craig laughed. The wrong kind of laugh. Defensive. Shaky. Oh, that's just a side business. Nothing related to this. Templeton nodded slowly. We'll circle back. That's when the cracks started forming. Not in their case, in them. Diane shifted in her seat, suddenly needing to adjust her blouse. Craig checked his notes, flipped a page too far, flipped back. Powell tried to steer the presentation back to emotional damages and parenting concerns, but it was too late. The judge had already tugged on a thread they didn't know was part of the sweater. Margot didn't smile. She just wrote one word in the margin of her notepad and underlined it. Entry. They'd walked in armed with fiction. The judge now had a taste of reality. And fiction doesn't hold up well under oath. Margot waited for the perfect moment. Not too early to seem aggressive. Not too late to seem reactive. Right after Powell finished his tired monologue about my emotional inconsistency and Craig's increased paternal involvement, she leaned slightly forward, lifted a thin folder from her briefcase, and said, calmly, like she was ordering coffee, Your Honor, we have one supplemental document to enter into the record. Judge Templeton didn't blink. Proceed. Margot handed the folder to the clerk without flourish. No dramatic pause, no speech. Just a professional handoff. That's the thing about a real trap. You don't set it with noise. You set it so quietly that when it snaps shut, people don't realize they were walking into it until their foot's already caught. Templeton flipped open the file. 3 pages. That's all it was. Not 200 glossy exhibits or emotional essays typed in Courier New. Just 3. 3 pages of compiled transactions pulled directly from Diane's personal bank accounts over a 6-month period, each cross-referenced with business registry data, showing that the recipient entity, Halperin Resource Management LLC, was registered to Craig's address, with Craig as the sole managing member, filed under a DBA, Blue Maple Consulting. Margot let the silence speak first. The judge's pen hovered above the page for an entire 10 seconds. When she finally looked up, it wasn't at Margot. It was at Craig. Mr. Halperin, she said, voice low but sharp. Can you explain why Mrs. Fields has transferred over $41,000 to a company registered under your name during the exact time frame of your relationship? Craig's mouth opened, then closed. Diane turned her head toward him with the speed of a hunting dog catching a scent. 41 what? She hissed. Craig held up a hand toward her. It's consulting. She asked me to help restructure her accounts. She didn't want to hire a full firm. It's normal. Templeton arched an eyebrow. Is there a contract? Craig's silence screamed. Diane started whispering furiously to Powell. Powell stood quickly. Your Honor, we'd like to request a brief recess to review. Request denied, the judge said before he finished the sentence. You submitted your materials in full. The opposing party is entitled to do the same. The courtroom stirred. You could feel it, the shift. The people in the back rows leaned forward just an inch. Even the bailiff moved subtly, as if the air had changed. Smugness was evaporating, replaced by that prickly kind of dread that crawls up the spine when you realize someone brought live ammunition to your prop gun fight. Margot added, Page 2 lists a series of invoices Craig submitted to Diane for child development planning. However, the timestamps overlap with timeframes when Mr. Halperin was listed as unemployed on legal documents. Templeton glanced back at the papers, then slowly removed her reading glasses. Mr. Powell, she said, did you review these invoices prior to submitting your financial disclosures? Powell's voice faltered for the first time. We were under the impression they were personal gifts. The judge's head tilted slightly. A gift implies no expectation of services rendered. An invoice implies otherwise. So which is it? Diane turned full body toward Craig now. You told me it was clean, that it was just transfers, not invoices. He didn't respond, just licked his lips and adjusted his tie again. A drop of sweat rolled down his temple. Your Honor, Margot said, voice still calm. We'd like to request judicial review of these transactions under the Financial Integrity Clause attached to the custody evaluation process. Templeton didn't even look at Margot when she replied. She was still staring at Craig. Request granted. Powell tried again. We object to the characterization of these transfers as malicious or deceptive. Templeton held up a hand. Counselor, I haven't made any characterizations, but I do intend to get answers. She turned to the clerk. Schedule a review hearing. I want full bank records from both parties, plus all communication logs relevant to this LLC. And notify the forensic auditor. We may require a fraud screening. There it was. The gavel hadn't dropped. But it didn't need to. The air in the room thickened. Diane's face went gray. Her shoulders hunched, defense collapsing under the weight of things she hadn't prepared for. Powell was flipping through his files like maybe there was some overlooked savior document buried in the chaos. Craig looked like a man who just realized the map he'd been using led him into the middle of a minefield. I didn't say a word. Just leaned back, letting the tension do what it was designed to do. Make them sweat. Make them feel what it's like to be caught playing checkers in a chess match. It wasn't over. But they finally understood. The judge was no longer a passive observer. She was hunting. Margot didn't ask for permission to bring in a witness. She didn't need to. We'd listed her name under supplemental disclosure weeks earlier. Buried in a file Powell clearly never read past page 4. Typical. They thought they'd already won on charm and theatrics alone. Never occurred to them that someone from their discarded past might be holding the fuse to the whole operation. Judge Templeton had just requested the financial audit scheduling when Margot stood again and said, Your Honor, we'd like to call one final witness today, if time permits. Templeton gave a small nod. Proceed. The courtroom doors creaked open, and in walked Amanda Reyes. Diane's head turned like someone had yanked her hair. Craig blinked 3 times in rapid succession. You could feel their mental Rolodex flipping through faces, trying to place her. Amanda didn't look like a bombshell witness. She looked like a woman who'd been underestimated her entire life, and finally enjoyed watching people realize their mistake. Slim, sharp, no nonsense. Her brown hair tied back, blouse pressed, eyes level. No smile, no hesitation. She took the stand. Swore in. Templeton asked, State your relation to the case? I was the field's nanny for a little over 2 years, Amanda said. Primarily for their daughter, but also handled errands, scheduling, and travel planning. I was let go last year. Diane leaned into Powell, whispered something fast. Powell tried to interject. Objection? Relevance. Templeton shut it down with a glance. We'll determine that shortly. Margot approached. Ms. Reyes, you mentioned in your affidavit that during your employment, you witnessed interactions between Mrs. Fields and Mr. Halperin that involved financial discussions? Yes, multiple times. And were these discussions recorded? Amanda didn't even blink. Yes, that did it. The courtroom, already tense, went completely still. You could hear a cough in the hallway outside. Craig's jaw visibly tightened. Margot continued. To clarify, these were recordings made legally, correct? Amanda nodded. One-party consent. Illinois law. I was the party. She pulled a small thumb drive from her purse and handed it to the bailiff. I have 5 audio files, all time-stamped and labeled. Templeton leaned forward. Start with the earliest. The clerk inserted the drive into the court laptop. The speakers clicked. Static. Then, Diane's voice, clear, irritated. Just move the money before the papers go through. He doesn't even check the accounts anymore. Craig's voice followed, light and smug. Even if he does, what's he gonna do? Cry in front of the judge? She'll probably thank us for sparing the kid from that loser. Diane again. We'll say he was unstable, that he made threats. Amanda, can you write something if we need it? Just vague enough to scare them. Click. End of file. Silence. You could feel the blood drain from Powell's face. Diane slumped back like she'd been hit with a sandbag. Craig sat perfectly still, eyes darting toward the judge. Then Amanda. Then me. I didn't move. I'd heard these already. 12 times. The first time, I sat in my car outside the grocery store for an hour with my hands gripping the steering wheel until they cramped. But now, I just let them play. Templeton's face was unreadable. A court reporter typed slowly, each keystroke loud as a gunshot in the stillness. Margot handed over a printed transcript of the 5 audio clips. These have been submitted under Evidence Group C. We're prepared to authenticate them in full. Templeton took them, flipped to the second page. Read in silence for a few seconds. Then she asked the question that would set the rest of the hearing on fire. Ms. Reyes, did either party ever instruct you to lie under oath or falsify information? Amanda didn't hesitate. Yes. Diane asked me to say Thomas drank during custody exchanges. He didn't. I refused. Powell stood again, his voice higher now. Your Honor, we object. This is unverified hearsay. Templeton interrupted. We have audio, Mr. Powell. That's more than hearsay. Craig finally spoke, under his breath but loud enough. This is ridiculous. You're taking the word of a fired nanny? Diane swiveled toward him, her voice cracking. You said you deleted those files. Templeton banged the gavel once. Enough. Even the reporters in the back row stopped scribbling. The judge turned to the clerk. I want full transcription of all 5 files. Redact nothing. Submit them to the auditor's office and the DA's review board. Craig sank slightly in his seat. Diane blinked rapidly, mascara clumping. Margot sat down beside me. She didn't smile. She didn't have to. The audio had spoken. Amanda hadn't just delivered testimony. She detonated a truth bomb, and the blast radius was just starting to expand. Powell stood up with the kind of urgency that always smells like desperation dressed as professionalism. He adjusted his cuffs, cleared his throat, and began to speak with a new cadence. One stripped of the theatrical flair he'd used just an hour ago. Gone was the confidence, the booming courtroom charisma. In its place, legal triage. Your Honor, he began, glancing at Diane, then Craig, then not back at Diane. In light of recent revelations, and for the sake of procedural clarity, my client, Mr. Halperin, would like to formally request independent legal counsel moving forward. Diane's neck snapped toward him. What? Templeton blinked slowly. You're severing representation? Craig's mouth opened, but Powell cut in first, trying to buffer the fallout. Mr. Halperin and Mrs. Fields may have had overlapping interests previously, but the nature of the evidence presented today warrants a conflict-free review of each party's involvement. Diane's hand slammed down on the table. Overlapping interests? We're engaged, you moron. Craig didn't flinch. Were. That single word hit her like a slap. Her jaw tightened. You absolute coward. You told me those wires were nothing. You said the LLC wasn't even in use. I didn't tell you to transfer the money. Craig shot back. Loud now, nerves fraying at the edges. That was your idea. You're the one who said to do it before the divorce was final. Because you said it was smart. You said it wouldn't raise flags. I didn't even know how to set it up. You signed everything, Diane. You set it up, Craig. Powell was frozen now, stuck between his collapsing clients like a substitute teacher watching 2 kids throw chairs. No objection. No motion. Just carnage. The judge's voice cut through the noise like a scalpel. Silence. It wasn't loud. It was surgical, cold and precise. Even the courtroom air seemed to stop moving. Diane sat, mouth still open. Craig exhaled slowly through his nose, like he just remembered how to breathe. Powell finally gathered himself and began rifling through his notes with the ferocity of someone who knew he was now preparing for damage control, not defense. Templeton leaned forward. Let me be absolutely clear. This court does not tolerate gamesmanship. What I've heard so far, and the evidence submitted, suggests that there may be cause to refer this matter beyond family court jurisdiction. She turned to the clerk. Please prepare an official referral of this case to the District Attorney's Office for potential review under fraudulent misrepresentation of marital assets. Diane's lips moved without sound. Craig closed his eyes. Templeton continued. We are not here to resolve your romantic dysfunction. We are here to determine the well-being of a minor child. And this courtroom will not be used as a stage for self-inflicted chaos. The phrase self-inflicted chaos hit Diane like a brick through stained glass. It was gone. The illusion, the careful facade they'd built, that she was the stable one, the planner, the mother reclaiming her life, that Craig was the composed, responsible new partner who would guide her into a better chapter. Their team had fractured in seconds under pressure, and Templeton saw everything. Craig adjusted his tie again. He had a tell. He always adjusted his tie when his confidence dipped. This time, he did it with both hands, like it might strangle him if he didn't loosen it. Diane muttered something too soft to hear, then said louder, "He manipulated me." Craig snorted. "Unstable. That's what she is. I told her this would blow up." Powell, finally, raised his hand like a defeated chess player offering to forfeit. "Your Honor, pending the court's approval, I'll arrange for Mr. Halperin to obtain separate counsel before continuing." Templeton nodded. "He'll need it." She turned her eyes on Diane. "Nothing dramatic, just clinical. And you, Mrs. Fields, should begin preparing documentation for all financial transfers made under your name, because I assure you, every single one will be reviewed." Diane didn't reply, just stared straight ahead like someone realizing too late that the room has caught fire, and the door is already locked. Craig leaned back, arms crossed, trying to project the illusion of distance. But it was too late for distance. They had built this mess together, layered it with confidence, cemented it with ego, and now it was turning on them. The alliances they'd weaponized against me, they'd become grenades, pins already pulled. When the courtroom settled, if you could call it that after the implosion of whatever Diane and Craig pretended to be, the judge turned to her clerk and gave a subtle nod. A side door opened, and in walked a woman with a thick binder and a soft but unwavering gaze. She wore no makeup, her clothes were plain, and she didn't look like someone used to being listened to. But the moment she spoke, everyone did. "Dr. Keller," Judge Templeton said, "please present your findings." Dr. Marlene Keller, court-appointed child psychologist. Quiet, thorough, incorruptible. Margot said she was the kind of person who didn't care if you were a senator or a janitor. If you lied to her, she'd see it in your pupils before your lips even moved. She stepped to the stand, opened her binder. "I've completed 6 interviews with the child in question, conducted over the past 3 months. 2 at school, 2 at the mother's residence, 2 at the father's." Diane leaned forward. Craig, now seated apart from her, stared at the floor like it had something worth studying. I just sat still. Dr. Keller continued. "At the father's residence, the environment was consistent. Predictable routines, prepared meals, communication about emotional needs, and visible parental engagement. The child appeared relaxed, spoke freely. She flipped a page. At the mother's residence, the child exhibited anxiety markers, repetitive behaviors, described feeling responsible for mommy's moods, mentioned instances of being left with Mr. Halperin for extended periods without prior notice." Diane's mouth opened, then shut, then opened again. She whispered to Powell, who didn't look at her. "Additionally," Dr. Keller said, "the child made 2 unsolicited statements of concern, both recorded in my notes. The first, 'Mom says if I tell people too much, Dad might get me taken away.' The second, 'Craig says Dad doesn't care about me, but Dad always brings crackers.'" The courtroom was silent. Crackers, peanut butter ones, the kind I'd been packing in her lunch since she was 3. I'd bought a new box every week, kept a stash in the car. Never told her they were part of the routine. I just showed up with them. Dr. Keller looked directly at the judge. "In my professional opinion, the father provides emotional stability. The mother's environment, while not physically dangerous, introduces inconsistent messaging and emotional strain. The child clearly exhibits preferential security patterns around her father." Templeton steepled her fingers. Margot leaned toward me, whispered, "This is where the pivot happens." And it did. "Mrs. Fields," the judge said, "why did you not disclose extended absences or the delegation of custodial responsibilities to a non-parent, particularly while your fiancé, now represented separately, was under financial investigation?" Diane fumbled for her voice. I had work, travel. Emergencies. He wasn't a stranger. I trusted him. Your child didn't, Dr. Keller said flatly. Templeton nodded once, then flipped through the original custody arrangement, took out a red pen, began writing. No theatrics, no announcement, just the sound of it, the pen scratching against paper like a slow rebalancing of scales. Craig shifted in his seat. Diane glanced toward me, wide-eyed, like she thought maybe she could reset the moment with a look, like maybe the man she'd dismissed a year ago might suddenly rush in to shield her from consequences. I didn't even blink. Templeton handed the paper to the clerk. The temporary custody agreement is revised. Primary custody will reside with Mr. Fields, effective immediately. Mrs. Fields will retain visitation rights, supervised if deemed necessary by Dr. Keller pending further review. The room didn't gasp. It just breathed. Diane sagged in her chair like someone had turned off the gravity. Her hands shook. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Maybe she was calculating what this meant for her image, for the narrative she'd been telling her friends, her coworkers, her own reflection. I didn't move, didn't smile, didn't gloat. This wasn't about victory. It was about return. Quiet, steady return. And the thing about custody, true custody, not just legal paperwork, is that it belongs to the one who shows up. Not the loudest, not the most dramatic, the most present. Craig stood slowly, tugged on his sleeves. He wasn't part of this decision. But the way he walked out, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, told the whole story. He thought this courtroom was his theater. Turns out he was just a stagehand who wandered into the wrong spotlight. And Diane? She didn't follow him this time. She just sat, looking around the courtroom like someone trying to spot the moment it all slipped through her fingers. Only there was no moment, just the slow erosion of a story built on noise, while the quiet man in the corner laid bricks. Judge Templeton didn't speak right away. She sat in her chair like a statue carved from law itself. Still, cold, composed. Only her eyes moved. They swept the room not as if she were deciding anything, but as if the decision had already been made and she was just giving the moment time to realize it. Then she turned her head, slowly, toward Craig. Mr. Halperin, she said, voice low and unmistakably final. You may want to retain separate counsel. He didn't even nod, just shifted slightly, as if even gravity had started to reject him. The bench behind him had emptied. No one sat near him now. Not Powell. Not Diane. Not even his supposed supporters who had been so smug earlier that morning. They looked away when his eyes flicked toward them, suddenly remembering texts they needed to check, shoes they needed to examine, lives they needed to quietly detach from his sinking ship. Then the judge turned to Diane. And Mrs. Fields, she said, her tone sharpening just a degree. You may want to review your calendar. You're due back here next Thursday. Diane blinked. For what? Templeton's eyes didn't waver. Fraud hearing. Full review of asset transfers, financial disclosures, and potential misrepresentation under oath. The words didn't land like a gavel. They landed like a mirror dropped from 6 stories up. Diane didn't breathe. You can't be serious, she finally whispered. This was supposed to be a custody review. No, Templeton said, cutting her off without volume, just force. This was always a full review. You chose which part to prepare for. Powell leaned forward as if to speak, then leaned back again. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't worsen it. Templeton didn't bother looking at Craig again. She turned, finally, to me, and something in her face changed. The mask of judicial distance eased, only slightly. Her posture didn't shift. Her hands didn't move, but her expression softened in a way that caught the whole room by surprise. I wondered if it was really you, she said quietly. I remember. Diane's head whipped toward me, alarmed. Remember what? I didn't respond. Neither did the judge. She just stared at me, seeing me not just as another name on a docket, but as something deeper. And in that second, it all clicked. The old charity event. Nearly 12 years ago. I hadn't recognized her name on the roster when Margot brought her up. I barely remembered the panel, the logistics work I did behind the scenes to fix a financial reporting disaster that could have sunk their funding. No press, no ceremony, just a quiet job done well. She remembered. Diane, now visibly trembling, looked back and forth between us, desperation blooming into confusion. Remember what? Still nothing. Templeton turned back to her bench and began writing. Diane's breathing quickened. Her hands balled into fists in her lap. She didn't understand how the courtroom had changed hands, how the center of gravity had shifted. But it had. Not with noise, not with shouting, with presence. The kind of presence that doesn't demand authority, it earns it in silence. The kind that sits still while others unravel because it no longer needs to fight for space. It already owns it. Diane's voice cracked. This isn't how it was supposed to go. Exactly. She'd built her entire case on the version of me she thought she had buried. The man she left in a rental apartment with mismatched plates and old photos in boxes. The man who didn't fight when she changed custody days. The man who stayed quiet while she and Craig played house on my daughter's time. But that man? He didn't walk into this courtroom. I did. And the court didn't need a speech to notice. It remembered. Craig burst through the courthouse doors like the building was on fire, and he needed to save what was left of his ego. He didn't stop to look around. Didn't wait for Diane. He just shoved past the steps, muttering obscenities under his breath. Tie flapping like a white flag that missed its cue. Diane followed, heels clicking erratically on the concrete like a metronome losing time. Craig, wait! Don't walk away from me! She hissed, grabbing at his sleeve. He jerked his arm free. Don't. Just don't. You fed me lies and dragged me into this circus. She looked stunned. Genuinely stunned. As if she hadn't spent the past year scripting every line of the performance that just unraveled in full view of the law. You said we were a team. Craig laughed, dry and cracked. Yeah? Well, your team just got indicted. He stormed off toward the parking lot without another word. Diane stood frozen near the top step. Alone. No Craig. No legal entourage. No one filming her now. Not unless you counted the reporters circling like sharks that smell blood but aren't quite sure whose it is. One of them stepped forward. Young, overeager, too new to recognize the full weight of silence. She held a mic like a sword she hadn't learned to swing yet. Thomas, she called out. Thomas Fields. Just one question? I was already descending the steps, briefcase in one hand, coat over my arm. Margot had said her goodbyes inside. No need for ceremony. She knew this wasn't a victory lap. Mr. Fields, why now? You said nothing for nearly a year. You didn't respond to the media. No statements, no pushback. Why speak today? I paused halfway down the steps, looked at her, then looked at the courthouse behind me. The stone walls, the old oak doors, the place where truth didn't always win, but today it had survived. And that was enough. I didn't need revenge, I said quietly. I just needed the truth. On record. A few cameras clicked. But no one cheered. No one clapped. It wasn't that kind of moment. I turned back to the sidewalk and kept walking, each step deliberate. Not dramatic. Not triumphant. Final. Behind me, I could hear Diane calling my name once. Just once. Not yelling. Not demanding. Asking. Like she wasn't sure what she was even asking for anymore. She didn't follow. She just stood there, in that exact space between the courthouse doors and the press line, caught in the purgatory of a woman who realized the story she told herself had finally fallen apart. Publicly, legally, and irreversibly. Not because someone shouted louder, but because someone waited longer. Because someone kept receipts. Because someone remembered what she forgot. It's never about winning loud. It's about walking away quiet. After everyone else has heard the truth echo through the silence you never broke. Until now.